Hi, I'm Danielle Todd, and you're listening to None of Us Are Normal. You can't see me right now because this is a podcast, but if you could, you'd see me putting emphatic air quotes around the word normal. Honestly, what does it mean to be normal anyway? Who decides what is or isn't normal for each of us, and why do we all so desperately want to be normal? If you don't know me yet, I'm a Canadian country artist living in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm a wife, a frequenter of my sunroom, a dog mom of two, and as of recently, a podcast host. In my experience as all of these things, I've decided that none of us are normal and that normal is something completely made up that puts limitations around our feelings and experiences. But here's something that's not made up. We all struggle. We all experience sadness sometimes, whether momentary or all-encompassing. We all deserve joy in our lives. No, none of us are air quotes normal, but we're all very, very real. Join me in real conversations with real people who I know and love to discuss mental health, music, and what it means to make the most out of life. These conversations will be equal parts tough and fun. As in anything in life, there are two sides to every coin. I'm happy that you're here, and I hope you enjoy this episode of None of Us Are Normal. This podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. It is in no way medical advice. For 24/7 free and confidential support, referral, and treatment options and guidance, please call the National Suicide and Crisis Prevention Hotline at 988. If this is an emergency and you are in an immediate danger to yourself or others, please push pause on this episode and immediately call 911. Hey friends, today we are going to have Natascha joining us, Natascha Myers. She is my very good friend and also my creative director. So anything that you've seen online has basically come through Natascha first. She is such an incredible friend of mine, and she's such a talented musician, creative director, branding, marketer, all things online person. And I'm very excited to chat with her about the music industry, the pressures of society, and different life changes and how she's adapted to just what life throws at us. So let's get into it. Natascha, honestly, why don't we just start by you telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I would love to. First of all, thank you for having me. Danielle and I met each other through the music industry. I am a pop singer-songwriter, although at the time I was very much a country singer-songwriter. And then I kind of took over a role for Danielle as her creative director, as she mentioned. But yeah, in addition to music, I'm really fortunate to get to do what I love and own a business where I do brand and web design. So I kind of get to be creative on all fronts. We're going to talk about this today, I believe, but I lived in Nashville for 4 years and then recently relocated back to my hometown of Waterloo, Iowa, which has been such a dream to be able to kind of work remotely and fly in and out. But yeah, I could probably talk for ages about little fun facts about myself, but I think those are the cliff.
Right on, right on. Yeah. So anybody who's listening, honestly, I remember Natascha and I met and we did some songwriting sessions together. And I obviously, followed her online. And I just remember Natascha being so blown away about how good you are at branding and being present online and all of these things. And I remember meeting you at a cafe and being like, please help me with this. And it was way before you even had a business in marketing and branding and all that kind of stuff. So is that kind of how it came about? Did you just sort of change into, that sort of career? Because us as musicians, we have to have, a bazillion different types of careers at once. But how did that come about?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, as you know, when you're an independent musician, you also fund yourself. And in order to release music, you have to be forward on online platforms. You have to have the album covers designed, do all the promotion on social media, all of that stuff. And I didn't have two dimes to rub together when I moved to Nashville. And so I was like, well, I know my way around a computer. I'll just learn all of this stuff by myself. And in the process of doing so, specifically with my own first EP, Songs from a Hardwood Floor, I was like, oh, I'm like actually having a lot of fun doing this. Like, it really invigorates me. Um, I'm sure you understand this as well, but just from a musician standpoint too, it's like, wow, I have like creative control here. I know what's going on like comprehensively. So that's really cool. But all of a sudden people started asking me about it, and they're like, who's running your Instagram? Like, who's doing your album artwork? And at first I was under the impression that they were going to tell me it was awful.
Oh, no.
And so I was like, well, who's asking? Because that'll change my answer. But lo and behold, people just wanted to know like who they could hire to do it. And so I was, when I first moved to Nashville, I was working at Frothy Monkey, which is a coffee shop. I was working at 4 a.m. and then going to a songwriting session. And then I was also working another job in sync licensing. I was a nanny for a time. And so any opportunity to make a buck, like without even leaving my house, with just being on my computer, I was like, for sure. So yeah, I kind of started like moonlighting, and just if someone asked, I was like, sure, I can do your album artwork for a couple bucks. And it wasn't until the pandemic when, I really had to get critical about how I was going to make a buck. I was like, I feel like I can legitimize this at this point. I've watched some YouTube tutorials and like read a ton of design books at this point. Like, let me see what'll happen. And I kind of did it quietly because music was still my mainstay and the priority. And all of a sudden it took off. So I was like, okay, well, I guess I have 2 careers now, and I'm so happy I do. But yeah, it all happened very organically that way, which I'm sure you can attest to that. When it happens like that, you don't force anything. It's like, I mean, why would I question it? Why don't I just do it?
Right. That's so awesome. And I'm really proud of you, because just watching from the outside, like I remember when I first met you and you were like, hey, I have like 47 writes today, but I can fit you in this little slot. And like you were just working so hard. And I don't think I've met anybody in Nashville who worked as hard as you did. And still, even now, you work just as hard, but I feel like there might be a little bit more zen in your life perhaps now. So
Yes.
how did you get to that point? Because not that you were ever like, super stressed before when I saw you personally, but I know that there's a lot of stuff that was going on in Nashville that was a lot of pressure. So how did you get to the point today where you are feeling, like putting mental health first?
Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to think where to start with that question because that's such a great one. So when I moved to Nashville, all of my mentors, all of the advice I received was like, you've got to be everywhere. You have to say yes to everything. Like any opportunity that's a no, like could be the thing that was going to shoot you to the top. And even before I moved to Nashville, so no fault of my mentors, like I'm the type of person where 100% isn't enough. Like I've got to do 150%. And at the time, my gauge for success was being exhausted and like having just a full color coordinated calendar. I would look at it and I'd be like, yes, like I am doing good things here. And just the more I got into my career and people started to say such kind things like you just did, very well intentioned, of being like, man, you're one of the hardest working people here. I just kept ramping it up because I was like, this is what people are telling me. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm seeing results. So clearly, like, I've just got to keep going. And I did get very good at, in front of people, in rights, at shows. Like, no one was really the wiser that I was sleeping like 4 hours a night and, just stressed out of my mind. But I would say, honestly, it was the pandemic, not to like be trite about it, but as you know, like the pandemic, we got the plug pulled on us overnight. Like it wasn't a choice to just slow down.
Yeah.
For us, it was like there's literally nothing you can do music wise except hop on Zoom and write songs, which I did. But those, you're like, I've got 3 or 4 hours of attention max before like we've got to get off the computer. So you had a hard cutoff there. And it was when that happened that I like noticed this sounds so funny because I'm like very in tune with my body, but I literally noticed like all of the static in my brain, like the high frequency stress that I was feeling just like really slowly dissipate. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to like note this as a takeaway so that when the world does open up again, at the time it was like 2 weeks, right?
Yeah.
Joke's on us. When the world does open up again, like I can just like take this with me. And obviously the world didn't open up for a while, so I had just a lot more time to establish better habits in terms of like taking care of myself, which was obviously high priority anyway during a pandemic. Yeah. But also just like recognize that it didn't have to be that way, and that if I was going to, quote, make it in the music industry, I sure didn't want to show up the way I was, where I was just totally exhausted, or like, goodness only knows, Lord willing, at an award show, just being like, I'm not actually having fun because I haven't slept,
Yeah.
or I'm not actually able to enjoy how far I've come because I almost like beat myself into the ground to get here. So yeah, it was just like a big mindset shift at the time that I think blanket statement, the best way to phrase it is like, it just doesn't have to be that way.
Right.
And success with a capital S is going to change, day to day, and people are going to be like, oh, it's awards and it's a full calendar and such. But I think we all define our own definition of success. And I was like, I think mine is like just being chill and doing what I love. I think like if I can achieve both of those at once, I'll be happy.
That's awesome. I love that. And just kind of back to what you were saying about when you first moved to Nashville, everyone was praising you for being so busy and saying like, you don't say no to anything, and your opportunity is just around the corner, so you have to keep running towards the corner. Like, that was like constant. And I really kind of I felt that when you said that, because when I moved to town, it was like, hey, if you're going to want to make a living on Broadway, you have to say yes to every single gig. And it was like,
yeah,
okay. So I said yes to every single gig, and I was working sometimes 12-hour days singing, and like, it was just constant. And then your physical body breaks down, and then so does your mental health. Like, you are so good at kind of masking your, the state that you're in, because I always see you and you're always like just so jolly and happy. And me, on the other hand, I'll like call you and be like, I didn't sleep last night. And like, like bawling, I can't do this or whatever. Like, I have zero poker face, but I just love how you said that people put pressure on you, especially in our industry. And then you end up putting pressure on yourself. And it's just a big pressure cooker.
Yeah. Well, and before we go on too, I'd love to point out that, you made the comment just now, like, you're so good at masking. And then, we're kind of like saying that it was a negative thing that you don't have a good poker face. I would almost say, sure that there are good instances to mask up, right? Like professionally or whatnot. But I would also say that could be a weakness for me, and you not having a poker face is a strong suit, because I think too, like, it's just not quote unquote normal to be like, yeah, I'm having a really hard time. Like, everyone just expects this buttoned up thing, although none of us have a buttoned up thing. It's just so interesting to me. So I just wanted to point out that, like, I would say that it's an asset for you to call me and be like, I didn't sleep well last night, and us have to like revamp something rather than keep going forward and pretend everything's fine.
Yeah, I actually have kind of learned the same thing as you over the last little while, is that like, if I'm not feeling 100%, there's just no point in me, trying to write a song, or, especially with songwriting, and you're meeting new people all the time. If you go into like a new songwrite and you're not feeling good and you're exhausted, like, that's not going to be good for you, because they're going to walk away and be like, meh, like, that was not and you're going to walk away thinking that was not the best version of me. And
Yeah.
yeah, and I feel like even just with talking and, talk on this podcast, being able to talk about mental health and all that stuff, I think another thing which kind of sort of weaves into what you do is social media in general. That was a thing I remember you and I had to work through, because I was just so tired of everyone
Mm-hmm.
putting on their mask and being like, hey, it's a pandemic and I'm doing great. Like, it's like, are we really all doing that great? And like,
Yeah.
everyone, everything that you see online is so always, positive. And then it got to the point where it was like people telling you to be positive all the time. And that just like drove me bonkers. And so I remember you and I working through that a lot because I just was like, I'm out. I don't want to be on social media at all.
Social media is like one of the biggest blessings for like promotion and businesses, but it is also one, like, it's my nemesis and I work in
Yeah.
it too. Like, I have to look at my relationship with it all the time because it's like everyone's kind of just putting on this front, this really well polished front. And when you're scrolling through, it's like, man, I must be like sucking a little bit because my life doesn't look like that. And that's really an approach I've tried to take on with my clients because although my relationship with social media like varies, I do think that there's a way to show up authentically, and that's what hopefully sets my clients apart. Hopefully you can attest to that as well, is that it's not all polished up. And that is what actually attracts the type of people that you want to attract. And I think that goes for anything in life. That if you are more honest and you're like, I'm not going to say I'm fine, although that's my knee-jerk reaction. I think people are able to connect to that better too, and feel like they can also open up and confide about what's going on in their life. So, yeah, social media is so funny. I mean, I've even been off of it, like not with my clients, I'm working around the clock, but with my own, I've been like, you know what? I'm not at my finest. I could be honest about that, but I also like don't have to say anything either. So I'm just like not going to post anything for a month.
Yeah.
And what's so interesting about that is then people are like, are you okay? Like, are you still doing music?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I'm just like taking a minute like,
Yeah.
to not post updates. So I think that's something we all have to be just really careful about because it's right in our hands and it's like so accessible. And I don't think all of us like notice how much it affects our mental health or even just like day-to-day mindset, when we're just scrolling around.
Absolutely. I totally agree. It's such a funny world that we live in as musicians and you as a creative director, and to always be kind of in a spotlight, even if it's not, at the Ryman or something. It's just like, but
Yeah.
you're always being watched. And I even remember like when I was like growing up, and I was, trying to make it in the industry and try to be a musician. And I was doing it full
Mm-hmm.
time, and I was working and making up my own shows and stuff like that. And I remember like constant people would talk about my image like all the time, right? And people would be like, "Oh, you're so beautiful, you're so skinny," and stuff like that. And then when you grow older and you change, I feel like all of a sudden it's like you start to put filters on your photos and you're scared to post stuff online on social media and stuff like that. And it's been a really strange kind of world to watch myself, like my physical body change, and then also just like my
Mm.
physical mind change. And I feel like I'm it was like rough at first, but now I'm like maturing into like I don't really care.
Yeah.
Like this is normal, like
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think there needs to be more of that. And it's funny you say that. When I first started and people were asking about my Instagram, there the behind the scenes of me running my Instagram like was so stressful. Like I just remember I had filters and I did like color coordination because that's what you do, branding. And I would literally like love a picture of myself or of me with friends, and it wouldn't fit the grid. Like it wouldn't match the colors of the grid, and I'd be like, "Oh, that's the only picture I have of this like party that I was at."
right.
And it's just so interesting how like critical that was to me at the time. And then my approach to social media now, I took all my filters off. Like I just post pictures as soon as I take them. And what's so interesting to me is people started to point that out then. They were like, "Oh my gosh, I love how you have like no filter and everything just like looks so like green and blue and like bright." And I was like, if more of us did that, then we'd all just be like, "Wow, look at like none of this photo editing."
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't have to like hold myself to a standard that's relatively impossible. And I also don't have to feel like I'm in the limelight all the time either, even if I am. Like, go ahead and look, but I'm just living. So,
Yeah, yeah, I'm just being me. Like,
yeah.
yeah, that's so cool. So, okay, just completely switch over topics. I guess it's a little similar. I see you on social media and I see you posting a
Uh,
lot of yoga stuff. Um,
yes.
how are you involved in that? How did you find that? And I feel like over the last like few months, or I mean, at least online, you've really started to like grow in yoga. And I want to know how that affects your mental health and your physical health and how you're feeling about that.
Yeah. So actually, when I first moved to Nashville, this will all be relevant, I promise. I lived like 40 minutes outside of town. And so anytime I left for the day, I had to like pack my car full of anything I needed because typically my schedule was like I had a meeting in the morning and then I would go to a write and then I might have a little bitty break but not enough time to go home and then I'd have another write and then I'd probably have a show at night or at least like need to be out networking. And I did a lot of networking when I first moved to town. Like again, it was that narrative like just be everywhere.
Yeah.
And that did work in my favor in terms for a time. But that being said, I always had like these awkward little breaks. And so, and I didn't want to like sleep in my car or like work at a coffee shop all the time because I couldn't afford to just buy a coffee every day. And so there was this yoga studio that unfortunately is no longer. And I was trying to remember the name right before I got on and I could not, but it was on 10th Avenue, which was like where I frequented that 12 South area. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to get a membership and I'm just going to go to a class anytime I have a break. And that way I'll like be getting my workout in, which I was struggling to get all my workouts in with how busy I was. And like I'll also be taking care of my mental health. And at the time I was just kind of noticing like I had just moved, but I was like, I'm like already getting kind of anxious all the time. Like I'm just going to nip it in the bud now. And I was terrible. I probably still am terrible, but I was really, really bad. But what was really cool about it was it introduced me to flow yoga. So basically, this studio was really big on like just do whatever your body wants you to do. Don't think about it. And so we'd like learn a flow sequence and as just like a guide, but then they'd ramp up the music, whatever the theme was for the day, and they'd just be like, just go, like do the flow, do whatever your body wants. And in doing that, I realized that like sometimes my body didn't want to do the actual motion, whether it was because I wasn't flexible enough or like I just felt the need to do something else. And in doing so, it was like there was just so much release to it. I kept going to that studio and tried to learn a little bit more. I eventually moved, and so I didn't have to like kill time all of the time. But I moved to East Nashville and started going to a studio there that was more focused on like the technique. And all of a sudden, I was like, oh my gosh, I like really enjoy the semantics of it. I really like learning like how it can be mind, body, and spirit incorporating. And I'm noticing a change when I like don't do yoga for a long time. I was noticing that I was getting really anxious. And so I was like, okay, I should be doing yoga. Yeah, and that's been kind of a 5-year journey of being like, I really like this. I'm drawing the connections with it actually helping me both physically with my chronic pain and like mentally just with being more level and balanced. But I'm also like enjoying learning this thing that isn't music, it isn't design, it's just like it serves no purpose other than for me to enjoy it, which it was something kind of new for me because I'm the type of person who, like, if I learn something, I'm like, do I have to monetize this?
That's the musician in you.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't remember the first time. I think it was during the pandemic, actually, that I posted a video of me doing yoga, which was just so nerve-wracking. But again, I was trying to get rid of the whole like performative social media take. And I just like posted, I'm sure the captions were something like super thought-provoking or whatever. But people were responding like crazy, and they're like, oh my gosh, like, this looks really good. Like, you look like you know what you're doing. Where have you been studying or practicing? And like, why do you do it? And I was like, this is really interesting. And so every once in a while, I'll just do like an Instagram story of me like doing a yoga flow. Usually I topple over like 4 or 5 times because I'm not like a professional by any means. And then just like the caption is usually just like whatever's going on in my life. And I've found that people like relate to that, which is cool. And I'm hoping to actually get certified coming up to like teach yoga. So
you are monetizing it.
touche. I will defend myself this time though and say it's not for the money. This is mostly because in order to like learn a lot of the like super nitty-gritty stuff, you have to go to like training.
Yeah.
And at that point you get certified at the end. And so even like end game or long game wise, I was like, gosh, I would love for even like my kids someday. I don't have kids right now, but Lord willing, like my kids someday, I want them to already have this knowledge of like there are tools for you to use and you don't have to go out and buy them. It's literally just your physical being. And like being able to teach them in a way that like, won't be harmful to their bodies. Cause I know I hurt myself like 1,012 times when I was learning yoga because I didn't know how to do it. So even just things like that of it just being like more incorporated into my life as a whole in a way where I'm not just like putzing around and watching a YouTube tutorial or like being like, I wonder what this does if I just like take both my feet off the ground and do a handstand. Like, just kind of making it more like holistically incorporated.
No, I think that's really, really awesome that you're doing that. And I can tell that it's coming from a place of, you know, interest and heart, and it's coming from a place that you're using it to take care of yourself and take care of your future. And I think that's really cool.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And what's so cool about it too, if anyone's listening and they're like, oh, I want to do yoga, or you're like, I never want to do yoga because this girl is like turning me off of it. I was always under the impression that I needed like a 60-minute time slot, which is typically what a class is. And I was like, I don't have time for that, like ever. But for me, what I do now is I'm like, you have to get on your mat at least once a day. And sometimes that's literally 10 minutes. Sometimes I'm fortunate to get an hour, but it's like yoga is just like showing up however you are that day, both mentally and physically, like for any amount of time. And also for any like state that you're in. Cause that was a big thing too, where I was like, gosh, sometimes like my body really hurts, or like just with any exercise, sometimes you're like, I don't want to do it. Like I just really don't want to do it. But yoga is really cool where it's like just a really grace-filled thing where they're like, if you can't do a pose today, like just don't do it. Just skip it. Go just lay flat on your mat.
Yeah.
And so that's been really freeing for me too, to be like, all right, as long as I like just get on it and like carve out this little bit of time of my day, then I'm at least like showing up for myself in some way if I am super busy or, you know, in one of those mindsets where I feel like I have to be chasing capital S success. So yeah, that's been really helpful for me.
That is actually super motivational, honestly, because I feel like I do a lot of stuff to like take care of my mental health, but I don't do as much to take care of my physical health, even though that's like the biggest thing to take care of your mental health. So
it's a double-edged sword.
Yes. And having that sort of excuse, like I don't have a minute, I don't have time to do it. It's like I could just wake up 10 minutes earlier and just lay on my mat instead of in my bed.
Yeah.
So like, yeah. So that's really cool to just kind of like, you know, just get there. And I feel like that's always the hardest part about physical activity in general, is just finding something that you love and just showing up is really the hardest part. Because even like if you know you love it, sometimes it's hard to just get there, but once you get there, you're like, oh yeah, this is great, and I should do this for an hour, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And something too that's been kind of a cool like trick, because I think sometimes we have to like we get in these states of thinking where we're like really caught up in the like do more, be better like mindset, and sometimes I feel like I have to trick my brain out of it. And so what I'll do sometimes is be like, okay, how can I like make this feel productive, just so my brain like gets its little like check mark,
Right.
because I love to-do lists, love check marks. And like even with yoga or like going for a walk or for a run, even if I don't feel like it, I'm like, okay, you know what I could do is like listen to this record that I've really wanted to listen to, and I can focus on the songwriting. There you go. You're like making your songwriting better, and you just happen to be out and about. Like just kind of making your brain like get what it thinks it needs at that moment in time has been really helpful for me to just like show up when I don't want to.
I love that. That is such a great point. It's so true. You always have to like, you know, make a kind of reward yourself too for doing it. Like I know a lot of people will be like, oh, if I get to go to the gym and I get to go have like a milkshake after or whatever, you
Yeah,
know, like
do it.
yeah, as long as
Do
you
it.
do
It
it.
doesn't matter as long as you feel happy and well-rounded. Do it.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so we had mentioned we're kind of all over the map, but I'm loving this so much. Let's rewind. You
Yeah.
were talking about yoga and how it's, you know, physically and mentally good for you. And I
Hmm.
actually had my cousin Robbie on this podcast as well, and
Okay.
he was talking about forced meditation. Have you incorporated meditation into your yoga? Because I know that that's like a huge part of yoga, and he was talking about forced meditation, saying that that's the best way for him to meditate, where he literally cannot focus on anything else and he's so focused on something. Is yoga similar to that for you? Or
It is. And man, kudos to Robbie, because I have tried. I didn't know it's called forced meditation, but I was forcing myself. I have tried that where I would like set a timer and just try to meditate, but it didn't work, and I know that meditation takes like practice. I know you're supposed to like start at 2 minutes and then keep going up, but it was achieving the opposite for me, where I was just getting like mad. I was like, why can I not stop thinking about work? Like, why do I need a mantra to repeat to like get me to zen out? And so I was like, okay, if this doesn't work for me, but it works for other people, that's fine. I can achieve the same thing with yoga. Of course, it takes focus for me, but and I actually like will gauge the success. I hate to use that; it is in quotes, of my particular yoga flow, like by if I was able to zen out and to meditate. But what's really cool is like if you do the free flow and you're not focused on what your body's doing, you're of course making sure you don't like hurt yourself, but you don't care what you look like. You're just like, all right, I'm just gonna like flow. What's cool about that is it gives your brain the opportunity to like actually go into that state and not focus so much on what you're doing. Um, and that has been really helpful for me. And it is cool how like rested I feel after one of those quote successful flows where I like know my practice is over and I like almost like come to again, where I'm like, oh, like I'm back in the real world. um being like actually being like, wow, I feel so rested after 30 minutes. Like I feel like I just slept 12 hours, you know?
that's awesome.
That's been really cool. But again, kudos to Robbie and everyone who does meditation like that. And I should probably keep trying. But um I've heard there's just so much value to just being able to like be like, okay, turn your brain off.
You know, he was actually saying, not to give too much away from my other episode, but he
Yeah.
was actually saying that he has to do activities like yoga or, you know, like he does free diving where he dives.
Wow.
Yeah, and so he's like, you have to really concentrate, and it forces you into a meditation, because he
Yeah.
says if you just, you know, if you just sit down, I feel the same way. Like when I sit down, I'm like, all right, when does the timer go off? Because I just need to go write a song or whatever it is, like got to take my dogs out, whatever, you know? And so
Yeah.
if anybody's listening out there and they have some tips on just like sitting down and meditating, please share them, because I do find it really difficult to just go into that state of mind. Um, but I like kind of how you can incorporate meditation into other sort of activities, I guess. Okay, so let's switch over now. The Nashville scene, you moved here. And of course, we talked a little bit about the pressures and how you kind of started to feel some anxiety while you were in town here. And then you mentioned that you moved back home. So how much of those decisions were based on, your mental health, and how did you actually make those decisions? I know we had talked actually another time, and you had mentioned that everyone was saying, "Oh, did you quit music because you're going to move home?" And like that, even that alone must have been a little bit hard to kind of deal with people's questions and stuff like that. So how did you kind of get through that?
Well, when I moved to town, there's the 10-year town narrative, which if you're not familiar, it's a musician thing where they say if you don't make it in 10 years, you won't, which I have multiple friends who have disproved that. So if you are an aspiring singer-songwriter, go stay as long as you want or can or would like to. 10 years is just a fake idea. But I went in and I was like, I'm going to stick it out. I'm going to stay 10 years. Even when I was like, interesting. Like, I'm maybe not, to my core, I'm not a big city girl. And like, I'm clearly like struggling with anxiety. All of a sudden, I was like starting to have panic attacks. But I was like, no, you must stay. And so even when I would come home for shows, people would be like, oh my gosh, you're living the dream. Like, you look like you're loving it. And it would just come out of my mouth where I'd be like, yeah, it's home now. I'm like, no, it's not. Like, I knew as I was saying it that I was trying to make it home. I really was giving it my best effort. And I did love my time in Nashville. But kind of with that whole mindset shift that I was having anyway, where I was like, oh, I don't have to like be everywhere all the time or everything to everyone. I also realized that I didn't have to follow the same footsteps as like every musician before me. In fact, I can name multiple people. I will right now, like Lori McKenna or Gregory Alan Isaacoff. Like, none of them live in Nashville or in LA. And I think that goes for any profession, music or otherwise, where I don't think the like way that it was done before is the way that it has to be done, especially if you're not at your best, like mentally and physically doing it. And so what's helpful to me with the decision is it really kind of came out of the blue. Like, I knew I was not happy. I knew I was struggling with anxiety, but I wasn't like, oh, maybe moving home is the answer. But one day I hopped on Zillow and was like looking at houses in my hometown. And speaking of meditative states, didn't even realize I was doing it. I was just like scrolling through and I was like, this is cute. And I sent a link to my mom. And she was like, wait, are you thinking about moving home? And in that moment, I said to her, I was like, I think I am going to start thinking about it like critically. And I knew full well that like it would change the trajectory of my career, right? Like, just by not being there all the time, I don't have the convenience of like going to a meeting, a publishing meeting or a coffee meeting. Like, I don't have the convenience of being in person and recording. Like, I have to do it here. I have to go set up in my closet. Like, things were going to change. But again, it comes back to that thing where I was like, I don't want to quote make it and like have missed the entire thing because I hated the ride, you know? Yeah. And so it was tough, but it took me, I think, like 3 or 4 weeks of making a lot of like pros and cons list and like talking to my parents. And I didn't involve anyone else in the decision. I didn't involve any like fellow singer-songwriters because I was like, I just think this needs to be what's best for me. I don't want any like outside opinions on this one. And in doing so, just realized like I can do this. It might look different for me. I might not get where I was headed before when I did live in Nashville and was pulling 16-hour days. But like, we only get one shot at this. Sounds so trite, but we only get one shot on this earth anyway. Like, I would hate to screw it up this way. So yeah, ultimately made the decision to move home. And even a year removed, I moved a year ago. I still get people being like, so did you quit music? Just because I'm not so like, well, they don't see me out and about, but also because I'm not so vocal about it on social media. And it's just like, like, that's okay. That's a valid question. I appreciate you asking. I appreciate the opportunity to say absolutely not. I have not. But I think no matter, like I said, no matter what you do, whether that be professionally or like where you're located geographically, like it's literally your journey.
Yeah.
And it's only up to you to make the most of it. People are going to perceive it either way, like, because that's just what we do as humans. Like, we have these little devices that give us the opportunity to perceive people. So like let them perceive, as long as you are well and happy and healthy. Like that's all that matters. So it's been like a literal dream. Like the moment I moved into my house, I was like, holy moly, like this is what I needed. Um, like I love being close to my family. I love being able to like fly into Nashville and work my butt off for a week and then fly out and like slow back down a little bit. Um, it just looks different, and I think that's just the way it goes. Like there's not one narrative.
I love that. I love that. There's not one narrative. You're totally right. I love that. And I feel like that is relatable to a lot of people in every industry. Like,
Yeah.
people moving to Hollywood for whatever, or moving to New York for whatever. I just had a friend move out of New York back to Nashville, and she was going to do a publishing, like writing deal. And she's like, I hated New York and I had to leave. And she's like,
Yeah.
even though that's where, it is, I feel like your life is wherever you are, work for you and whatever makes you happy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, exactly. And like I said, like I loved my time in Nashville, and I think it was so fitting for like I was young. I did have the like grind mentality, and then I just snapped out of it, and I was like, well, this doesn't work for me now that I don't have that mentality anymore. That's not to say, like, if you are in Nashville and you are pulling 16-hour days and you're loving it and you're like still managing to eat and sleep and all those things, that's not to say it's wrong. It's just like it's different for different people. And that was such a like interesting lesson for me too, of learning that like I am a highly sensitive person. Like that's just the way I'm wired. I cry at every romantic movie. Like I do like process my emotions and think like, which emotion am I experiencing right now? Like that's just the kind of person I am. And I was like, I personally don't thrive in this place.
So about just adapting,
Mm-hmm.
you had said this, like you only get one shot and you hope that it's not, I forget how you said it now actually, but you had said like you only get one shot and you want to be happy in life. And I think that that's really, really cool. Now you've adapted your whole career and you have changed your goals. How do you feel about changing your goals? Because sometimes when I have like these big giant goals, and you know all about my big giant goals actually because you're my creative director. But like sometimes you have these really big giant goals, and then all of a sudden with me personally, my life changes and I'm
Mm-hmm.
maturing, and I own a house now and I have two dogs and I have a studio, and all these things are changing, and it changes what my goals are. And I
Mm-hmm.
feel like when they first started changing, me personally, I kind of felt like I was failing because I was changing my goals rather
Mm-hmm.
than just viewing it as like, I don't really want that anymore. I want this now. And it's not
Yeah.
like I didn't get that, so I'm going to give up on it. It's like, I just want this now. Or do you feel anything similar like that?
Yes, I do. And I'm such a goal setter anyway. So like I wish I was one of those people that like had like one goal, but no, I have 49. Like there's just so much I am passionate about in this life and would like to do with it. Um and it's so interesting that you say this, but it was a big part of it was learning like just because something changes because I have fundamentally changed, whether that be my circumstances or like who I am physiologically, like that doesn't make this goal that just like didn't get done because of the nature of the beast, right? Like I didn't get there timeline wise. I didn't have enough time before I changed. That doesn't make it a failure. It just makes it like life.
Yeah.
And I still struggle with that. Like I am constantly grappling with like wanting to make that check mark again and like make these things happen. But gosh, even talking to you now, I'm like, I'm glad she struggles with that too, because it is so hard not to see it as failure just because it never got done or it didn't get done the way you originally thought it would. That's been something really hard for me, like even with the record that I've been in the process of making for almost 2 years now. When I started making the record, I went into it, I was already kind of undergoing a lot of that like mental health mentality change. When I started it, I was like, okay, like whatever happens with this project happens. Like I want it to come out organically, like get done when it gets done, relative timelines, but I don't want it to be pressure. Like I just want it to be what it is, because I think that's what art is. Like once you put it under pressure, it stops being art. And but that was, I had put like a year timeline on it, and I'm still making it. And, you know, that was because like for a minute I went to Europe for a month because I like needed to go to Europe for a month. And then like for a second, I kind of was like not invigorated by the project. And I was like, well, I'd hate to put 50% into this project that I've formerly put 100% into. So I'm just going to like step off for a couple months. And even though like I know what I'm doing actively, I do constantly have the mentality of being like, but that's not what I said I was going to do. Like, that's not what I said 2 years ago when I first started. And it's just like, it's okay. Like, it's life. Like you said, like we change and our circumstances change too. Like you have 2 dogs, I have a dog, and I have to keep it alive.
Yeah.
Sometimes priorities just shift a little bit. And like, I know it sounds really, what's the word? Like, not invalidating, but really small to just say like, oh, it's okay. But like, it really is. That's the only way you can really say it, is it doesn't matter. We're on a floating rock in the sky. Like,
That's so funny. Yeah. I mean, honestly, you set goals, and if you don't achieve them, or they change or whatever, or they don't happen in a certain amount of time, like really it's how you feel about it. It's not how anybody else feels about it or views you. Like nobody really
yeah.
is invested in your goals. Like it's just your own goals. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm trying to learn to be, patient with myself and the expectations that I put on myself. And that's
Yeah.
kind of what I'm hearing from what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, and you make a good point too. And no one's looking at you as much as you think they are, or no one's thinking about you as much as you think they are. I think like once I got that through my head, because I've even had it now where I'm like, oh, people probably think I'm like, I stopped making the record, even though I'm actively still making it. I'm like, no, they don't, because they're not thinking about me all the time. I'm not under a microscope. That's not how like the human race works. And that's been really helpful too. And I think that can be helpful towards mental health in general.
Right. I love all of that. Well, Natascha, thank you so, so much for joining me here today. Thank you for just being a constant friend in my life, and, such an amazing person to work with creatively. I am so I admire you for everything that you do, and I'm really grateful for your honesty today. So thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, you're so sweet. Thank you for having me. And like, thank you so much for having this podcast in general. Like, I hope more people feel like they can have these sorts of conversations, but also hear our conversation or your conversation with Robbie and just feel a little more seen and a little more okay to be human.
Now it's time for your pick-me-up of the day, a quick piece of advice to help you through hard times.
I would say my go-to is what I call dance it out. So kind of like I talked about when I was talking about free-flowing yoga, sometimes your body just like wants to get out this like negative energy or tension that it's holding up. So I will turn on whatever like high energy song I'm feeling at the moment and just like let myself have at it for however long the song goes on, however long my body needs or my mind needs. And it's really crazy how like literally after those 3 minutes or 4 minutes, I'll just be pumped on life or like just reinvigorated a little bit. Might still be sad, but just be like, okay, I can carry on. So yeah, dancing it out, that's a good one. If you need any songs to get you started, happy to help. Looking for Somebody to Love by the 1975, Invisible Touch, Genesis, that's a go-to. I probably could think of so many more, but I'll just make a playlist and add it to the show notes. How about that?
Thank you for listening to None of Us Are Normal. Being a human is hard, and I hope hearing from other humans on my show helps you in your own experience. For additional resources or to learn more about today's guest, please visit DanielleToddMusic.com.
So make it worth every joy, worth every pain. Look for the sun.